Guaranteed annual income, UBI. Do you mind telling us about your position on UBI?
Sure. So I think a guaranteed annual income, the only way it could be achieved is by robbing people, because you have two people on an island, Crusoe and Friday. If Crusoe doesn't want to give the guaranteed annual income to Friday, and Friday has to have a guaranteed annual income, you're going to have to rob Crusoe. And robbery is something immoral; it should not be done. So I'm against it.
I don't follow why it would need to steal things there. So, for example, I could say if I have a bunch of robots who do work for me and generate income, and then I can then redistribute my own income, like the government could potentially own in several countries, they own 80-90% of the oil or whatever, and then so they have an income and they could redistribute that income without stealing it from anybody, right?
But then that's just, are you just hoping that people will choose out of the goodness of their hearts to give a bunch of money out to other people?
No, I mean, like the government owns a big company, like an oil company, so they make profit and then they can use that profit to distribute to people. Simply having a UBI doesn't entail stealing anything.
Well, what would distinguish the government here from just any old group of people?
I'm not sure. I mean, a group of people could also choose to instantiate a UBI voluntarily. So in that case, also UBI wouldn't entail stealing either.
But then it just sounds like you're kind of hoping that someone's going to, out of the kindness of their hearts, whether you want to call this group of people the government or not, you're just hoping that they will choose to start giving people money. But then that's not guaranteed. They might decide that they don't want to start doing it anymore.
Sure, but I mean that's like what we saw happen during COVID in many of the European nations. They did give out those things. So I mean, I'm not trying to argue that the universe or something should enforce people to have this, make it a law of physics or something. Therefore, they don't have a choice or whatever. That wouldn't make any sense. So, I mean, I'm just going for the regular one where the government gives out money to people, which we've seen happen.
Well, yeah, we've seen it. We've seen plenty of government welfare programs, but these are all aggressive, right? That's they get these money through tax, which is a form of theft, and that's how they get the money for it.
Well, that's why I brought up places that have like 80% ownership of oil. They don't get it through tax; they get it through profit through selling services.
Right. So, a lot of these places where you have like these massive government, like Saudi Arabia, whatever, where they own a bunch of oil, they've stolen that, right? They've stolen money to start engaging in conquest, and then they say, right, no, you guys aren't allowed to go out and drill this oil. We're going to go ahead and do it instead. So that's criminal. They are forestalling that from other people. It's not like a free market where people just decided out the goodness of their hearts to start giving people welfare.
I think it's like Norway that has 80% of their oil stuff because they bought it. I don't think they
right. But how did they buy it?
With money, and like you have this land.
Where'd
I would like to buy
money?
this land from you. Well, I mean,
the question is, where'd they get that money? They got it through taxes, right?
Sure.
Then it's not a legitimate contract. They didn't own that money, which they used to purchase it. They stole it from someone else, so it's not a legitimate contract.
Well, that seems to be like a separate issue from is UBI good? The fact that governments get money from taxes seems to be separate from is UBI good? And then the question, I think, is UBI good?
I mean, I'd say the funding of UBI, like where you get, how you were able to accomplish UBI, I'd say that's entirely relevant to whether or not it's a good thing.
I don't think so. Like, say Hitler instantiated a UBI, or some super Janist, non-pacifistic who only got money through donations instantiated a UBI. Whether or not the UBI works and has positive incomes is independent of the means used instantiated it.
Sure. So maybe we can go on to a UBI where it is definitely entirely voluntary. Like it's just some guy.
The government just gets through donations.
Yeah, like people just decided that they wanted to have it this way. Well, the problem there is that it's still a welfare, so you're still encouraging people to be less productive, right? You are incentivizing, if it's going to be universal, you're incentivizing people to not work as hard as they would otherwise, which is lower production, not great.
All right, that again.
So, if you have like this welfare on essentially just to everyone, the problem there is people aren't going to work as hard, so you're going to have less production, right? I wouldn't have any like specific legal problems if it was entirely voluntary, but I think it would probably not be the best, right? You're still going to have less productive activities going on.
I don't think that would necessarily follow, because it's possible that giving people a UBI would increase the number of extremely poor people who have access to food and childcare and things, which then gives them more time to spend in the workplace. So like normally people have to do things like take care of their kids because they can't afford to give their kids to childcare or daycare, and so they don't have as much time to be able to work. And so giving them a UBI could actually increase the productivity by allowing them to take advantage of services that would give them more time to invest in whatever they're working on.
Well, like, let's go for like, so this is the problem that like I'm facing here, is that I really just don't see a UBI ever being voluntary. It's I see it as a redistribution. Sure, maybe it's fine on like a voluntary level to give money to people, but I really don't think that's universal or guaranteed. That's sort of just like charity, right? Is your view of UBI just hoping that people will, out of the kindness of their hearts, choose to give it to them?
What's more like it'd be a government program where we sign like a bill that we're going to pass this much money and send it out to people at this rate over this time period, and then it just be sent out like tax returns. I don't think the government does tax returns out of the kindness of their heart. I think they like contractually obligated to do these things because they've said they're going to do these things. So I mean, I'd say it's no different than taxes in that way, or tax returns.
Well, I mean, if UBI is just returning people's taxes, then yeah, 100% UBI, return all the taxes and don't take any more. But I don't think that's what UBI is. Right?
Well, no, I'm
UBI
saying
is
the
government.
process of returning it. So the process of the government returning taxes isn't like me hoping that the government's going to be nice and decide to return taxes. It's like it's a government process of that works in a very specific way. And so the UBI would be the same thing. So it's not just hoping people will be kind. But I think there's a difference between hoping people will be kind and depending on a government program that has a very consistent, demonstrable effect that we can measure over time.
Well, then this is definitely, if it's a government program where they are redistributing wealth from people who are paying taxes towards just everyone, that is in effect, because we can ignore when I pay N amount of money in taxes and I get back N amount in the UBI. That cancels out, right? What really matters is when I'm paying a bunch more than the amount I'm getting back in UBI, then that much more that I'm paying in then gets shifted over to other people. This is a redistribution of wealth from people who are paying more taxes to people who are paying less, which absolutely is definitely a destruction of wealth because it's entirely tax-based.
Well, I mean, that's a redistribution. I don't think it'd be a destruction, but I would argue that if the redistribution of wealth can cause more people to be able to afford childcare, child support, or whatever, and then have more time to work and create a more productive economy, then that's a good thing for the economy, even though it may not be perfectly moral. Like, I don't think stoplights are moral, but they're good for the economy. I think that the UBI would also be a justified immoral action in that even though it's taking money from some people in the form of taxes, it can provide more people in the economy opportunity to work and create a more robust economy and better living standards for everyone in it.
So what we need to really think about here is, right, where is this tax coming from? It's how do you actually get a taxable asset? Well, there are a few different ways you can do it. Either you could go out into nature, see something which is good, and you take that's homesteading, or you could maybe use something that you homesteaded and produce something new, so that's production, or maybe you trade it with someone else. You get something by trade, trade. So those are the three ways you can get a taxable asset. So a taxation, therefore, will be a disincentive on production, homesteading, and trading. It is precisely production, homesteading, and trading, which is how we get a lowering of time preferences over time. So you are enacting a counter tendency towards a raising of time preferences over time. And this is a decivilizing effect. You are making people closer to the bare subsistence hunter-gatherer, where you just consume immediately. You're not saving for a real long time. This is decivilization.
Well, if you implement a tax, which would, I agree, be a disincentivization of certain things because you're giving up a percentage of your money. If the benefit is to counteract a different disincentive that is even greater, then you have a net positive. So, for example, if I pay tax to have a police station and the police station protects me from a bunch of gangsters, the gangsters are a disincentive, because if the gangsters come and take my company and burn it down or whatever, that's obviously a reason for me not to be there. But if the police protect me from them, now, even though I have a disincentive of wanting to pay X amount of taxes, that disincentive is far less a burden than the disincentive of being attacked by a bunch of gangs or another military or something, or the Indians in the Wild West or whatever. And so while paying taxes would be a disincentive to some degree, if they are a lesser disincentive than the naturally occurring other disincentives in the area, it would still be a net positive, and so it would actually increase productivity.
So what is the greater burden on productivity which a UBI would solve?
Lack of childcare, lack of medical health, lack of education, military criminal threats, not being able to have binding contracts that can be enforced with other parties in the area, legal rights, constitutional rights, Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, just to name a few.
So this greater burden is that, some people, they're so poor that they can't attain all the ends that they would want to attain. So therefore we gotta take money from the rich people so that they can attain those ends better. But it's precisely in doing production, homesteading, and trading that you do attain your ends. That's how you attain the means to attain ends, right? So you are having still less production, less homesteading, and less trading. You are making a disincentive on that. Yeah, you are making some people more able to attain their ends. You're enriching this group at the expense of this other group. But overall, this group is the way more productive group by definition of what it means to tax. The more productive you are, the more taxable assets you have. So yeah, you'll have this small group over here, which, yeah, great. They are being enriched at the expense of other people, but it's those other people who are more productive.
Well, it also protects the more productive people by protecting their assets through legal rights, police, military. So the benefits aren't only, there are benefits for the poor people, which gives them a greater incentive to accept the burden of taxes in order to protect them from the greater burden of not having health care. But there's also an incentive for the rich people to accept the burden of taxes to protect them from being manipulated or lied to or cheated in contracts, or having gangs or police or poor people steal their assets.
Some gang rob them.
Yeah. Or a military Genghis Khan coming in and taking in your assets, which is what happened to large landowners would just have all of their stuff taken by large militaries. And so having someone to protect you from that is a benefit that is gained by the rich people from also paying taxes. And so both the rich and the poor benefit from paying taxes.
So yeah, it would suck super bad if I was this wealthy person and somebody came along in a gang and they start pointing guns at me and saying, "Hey, give me some of your income now, or we'll lock you in a cage," or whatever. That would be bad. So what we need another group who comes along with guns and they say, "Give us some of your income now, or else they're going to take some of your income." Right? This is a contradiction. If it's a bad thing to be,
well, no, that wouldn't be a contradiction if you pay one less. So like if I pay a monthly fee to a protection service, and that monthly fee is lower than what I would lose if I got robbed, then it would be a net positive.
it's still crime, no matter what, right? Why don't we just say, hey, all of these people who want to come along and rob you, they're all bad, right? Because that was the entire reason why you said we needed to have all this tax, is because these people coming along and robbing you is bad.
Right, but there's naturally occurring badness. So, like, if there's a naturally occurring badness that happens because nature is bad, and we're trying to mitigate the badness of nature, then if we're already stuck with some level of badness, um, trying to mitigate that badness by a smaller badness is justified.
Is crime a naturally occurring badness?
What
Is crime a naturally occurring badness?
is sort of, yes,
What makes it naturally occurring? Surely the fact that
species.
people have to come along and do it, that makes it not natural. That's man-made. That's a man-made problem.
No, like a lion stealing your cow versus a person stealing your cow isn't, you still lose the cow. And so the crime there, the loss of your assets is the same regardless if it's done by a human or a lion. And so if the case is that there are social species and some social species have less and then try to steal from more, it doesn't make a difference whether or not that's by a agent in a cultural system who understands laws versus a lion who tries to steal your stuff. The goal of the government, the taxes you pay to the government protects you not only from the gangs of people, but also the lions who steal your stuff because you can build fences and get technology and have rights to manage your land and kill those things or whatever. And to protect you against disease because you can go to the local healthcare officials. You can get stuff from the government to protect your animals and your land that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to. And so the payment to the government isn't only against other people doing crime, it's against nature taking your stuff because it's nature. Insurance policies that must be enforced because the government requires them, that if like you have a landslide or something, you can then charge the insurance company and get reimbursed. So the damage here isn't specifically related to people and crimes. It's related to anything in nature that can destroy your property, which you didn't consent to, which can include gangs and stuff.
I mean, can you not have insurance on a free market to defend against these natural threats?
No, how can insurance protect you against like robbers or anything like that?
Well, I mean just the natural threats, So I have a field of cows, and I'm worried about lions coming through and taking these cows. So I subscribe to an insurance agency, and they say, right, we'll insure your cows. If they get taken, then you'll be reimbursed, right? I don't see why that couldn't happen on a free market.
Because they have no reason to actually uphold the claim. Like they can just say, "I'm not going to pay you back," which happens a lot when there's not a big
But that would be
force.
that would be criminal. That would be fraud, right?
Right.
Right. So then that would just be another form of a person being a robber. They're stealing
Right.
from you.
And the only way to prevent that is
And
to have somebody who has a bigger gun to enforce the laws to make sure they don't do that.
so the only way to prevent theft is to have somebody else robbing you. Seems like that doesn't prevent the theft.
No, the only way to prevent theft is to pay for a system that can enforce rules. And so if you don't pay for the system, then you don't have anyone to enforce the rules. So it's not, if you're paying for a system in order to prevent theft, that's not theft in and of itself.
So would you be fine with a completely voluntary system of I want to pay these people to enforce my rights? Or
Sure, I'd
would
be
you be
fine.
saying, no, you got to pay?
Well, I mean, I'd be fine with it being voluntary, but I'd say that if one system works better, it demonstrably works better, like the one there's coercive taxation over an area, and that one has better outcomes, then I'd say it's justified to impose that system rather than use the one that's voluntary.
But then you have, the contradiction again. It's like, well, the only way to prevent this crime is to have crime. But then you're not preventing the crime. You've still got the crime.
Well, no, it's like a prison. If you put a prisoner in prison, you're putting someone in prison. You are restricting their will without their consent, which is immoral by my standard. But you're doing it to protect everyone else from having their wills imposed on by the criminal. So yes, you do one bad thing to prevent greater bad things. Trolley problem, sacrifice one, save five. So yes, in this world that we live in, there is a natural requirement to do some bad things to prevent worse bad things, and that's just a natural law of nature, pretty much.
How do we determine which bad things are badder than the other bad things? How do we rank orders of badness?
I would say pragmatically, the best way is to say that if it causes the most death, destruction, destroys society, starvation, like the most imposition on will and destruction of life would be the worst ones.
Most imposition on will.
Yeah. So like killing someone is worse than breaking their leg because you've imposed more on their will by killing them.
Can we get that in concrete? Like how are we actually going into like knuckle deep saying, right, we don't know whether or not killing is worse than breaking of a leg. How do we go through the steps and say, right, this one has 3 units of imposition on will and this one has 2 units? Like how are we ranking these?
Well, like if we kill someone, we ask them, what would you want? Or like we ask someone a list of things they want, and then we kill them, and they can achieve 0 of those things. If we have a list of something people want and we break their leg, they can still achieve many of those things. It's not a 0. So killing them makes it 0. Whereas breaking their leg does not make it 0. So the number of things that they want out of life is diminished, but not to the same degree as if you kill them.
All right, so it's sort of like, the ranking of different ends. Which ends have they been deprived of in their ranking of different ends that they want to achieve?
Sure.
Right, but then how are you comparing this between person A and person B then? Person A wants to go swimming, and then he wants to play basketball and eat an ice cream. And person B, they want to eat an ice cream and then drink a beer. Like, how are you trying to equate these things? Like the 2 top ones are equal in utility?
More or less, I'd say that that's irrelevant to the discussion because the scale at which we would be comparing these would be like 100 million people die of starvation. Like that's a very big imposition on will, regardless of their individual wants. Like, who cares? Versus if only 10,000 people die of starvation, like the 10,000 is a far less imposition of will than the 100 million. So we want the 10,000 one. That one's a better one in general.
Which would be the bigger imposition on will, if I was robbed of $1,000 or if you were robbed of $100?
Probably you being robbed of 1,000.
How are we determining this?
Just a guess. Like again, that would be irrelevant to the claim here, because the claim here is more, if I have this system that steals X amount of money and it saves millions of lives, the millions of lives are going to outweigh any amount of money being stolen.
But then you're making a judgment there. You are saying, right, these people's lives are worth more than this person's money being stolen, right?
Right.
It's the same with the leg thing. This ultimately is going to come down to an interpersonal comparison of utility. So you're saying this group, their ends are worth more than this group's ends.
Well, right? This group's life is worth more than this group's money. So like taking someone's money would be more analogous to breaking someone's leg, in that you may restrict some of their freedoms, but you're not killing them, ending all of their desires. Whereas if someone starves to death, that's killing them. They've lost all their desires. And so just like we can determine that breaking someone's leg is less of an imposition than killing them, we can say stealing someone's money or a small portion of someone's money is less of an imposition than letting someone die of starvation.
Right. Well, then that's, because not everything is going to be losing money versus losing life. Let's do, someone gets their arm chopped off versus someone gets a penny robbed from them.
Yes. So arm chopped is worse than penny.
Why is that?
Because chopping someone's arm off would restrict their ability to achieve their will to a greater extent than having a penny stolen from somebody.
How would you go about determining this?
What can you achieve with a penny in society versus what can you achieve with an arm in society? We do the same thing. We'd have a list of, we'd give each person a list of all the things they want, and we'd say, how many of these can you achieve if you lose the penny? How many of these can you achieve if you lose the arm?
So in this society of, this utilitarian society, every single person would have to be constantly listing out every last thing that they could possibly want, and then saying everything which would, damage their ability, and which ends it would damage, right?
In general, but then we'd make this thing called like a constitution where we'd have a set list of the most important rights that everyone should have. And then as long as everyone has those rights, everything else becomes secondary. So as long as everyone has the minimum criterion of rights outlined in the Bill of Rights and Constitution, which are the ones we agree upon are the most important for people, that's like, we don't even have to ask anymore. You get these are the ones that we're going to supply by default to all of the peoples.
And how do you come to these rights if you don't have everybody listing out everything they could possibly want and telling you what different damages could be done to them and how it would affect their different ends?
Well, there's lots of ways. We can look at what are the things that people tend to like in general, with the vast majority of people being the ones that we poll, and we say the vast majority of people like to not die and not starve to death. And so that's an important one. We'll put that one on there. Right to liberty, life, pursuit of happiness, kind of a thing. And so once we have the established, this is generally what the vast majority of humans want or need to function, those will be the ones that we put on this list. And there'll be different lists, and we'll try them out differently. And the ones that are the most effective at producing a happy society are the ones that we will tend towards.
Then you're still, you're still going to need the vast majority of people to do this massive listing task, which I don't think a single person could do this listing task.
We've done it. I don't understand the problem there. Like,
we have. I don't think anybody in history has ever listed out every single thing they could possibly want and told you.
They wouldn't need to. They don't
like,
even need to list like some of them. Like, do you want food? Yes. Do you want to breathe? Yes. Not be tortured. That one's on the list. Like, pretty much every legal system in society is literally just listing out things people want and don't want to happen to them. That's what we've been doing since the beginning of time. I'm not sure what you mean when you say we've never done this. It's literally all we do.
But then you're just taking an arbitrary selection of the things people might not want to happen to them, right? And just because I don't want something to happen to me doesn't mean that it's suddenly criminal for it to happen to me. Like, I might not want my friend to call me a mean name. Like, I don't want that to happen. I want them to still be my friend, right? And I would lose opportunities if they stop being my friend. Does that mean that, and I think you ask anybody if they would want their friends to stop being their friends, they'd probably all say no, right? Nobody wants their friends to go away. That doesn't imply that it's criminal for their friends to stop being their friends, right?
Right. Because there are other things that supersede that one, like not slavery. Not slavery is a good one.
But then how do you know that it supersedes the friendship breaking?
Well, that's already been determined by thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of processing through these legal systems that have happened many, many times. So I'd say
how did they determine that, though?
Well, there's lots of complicated philosophical systems that do analyze that. Like, for example, in order to maintain a friendship, whatever, without consent would entail slavery, and slavery would infringe on the freedoms of the friend more than the restriction of the person not having a friend would infringe on their freedoms. And so you can do an analysis there, and that seems like rather irrelevant to the topic. It seems like just a more pedantic point about how we assess why is certain forms of harms worse than other forms of harms, and there's a pretty much a universal agreement on most of those, the vast majority of those, all in the world. So that's not really like a huge point of disagreement.
But I think there is no strong philosophical basis for any of this, because if all you're doing to determine, well, this harm is worse than that harm, is by asking people what they don't want to happen to them, then everyone's going to say they don't want to be a slave. Everyone's going to say they don't want to lose their friends. How do you determine which one's worse?
Well, I mean, again, there are ways to do that, but it doesn't seem really relevant to the topic, because the topic is more like, if society X causes deaths of millions of people and society Y causes deaths of tens of thousands of people, and having no society causes deaths of somewhere in between or whatever, which society should we prefer? Well, less death is good. And we can just do the same process for any given of the ones that we already agree on in general. No rape, torture, slavery, whatever. And if we have some standard of things that humans generally agree upon that we don't like rape, slavery, murder, whatever, torture, like, we think those are bad, so we want societies with less of those. And so if we have some generally agreed upon things we want less of, and we want to pick a society that maximizes the good ones and minimizes the bad ones, whatever those are, which we tend to agree on, then we can assess which societies are objectively better and which societies are objectively worse based on this criterion. And once we have that, we can say, does this particular policy increase the number of things we consider suffering or decrease them? And so we can assess whether it's a good policy or not. And so UBI seems to decrease the bad ones and increase the good ones for the vast majority of people in society, making it a good policy.
So to determine that losing friendships would be not as bad as being a slave, you'd have to have one society where they tried out, all right, we're going to have no slavery, and this society where they say, no, you're allowed to have slavery so long as you'd maintain friendships that way. Would you have to try these
I
two
just
systems
consider that
out
problem's
and
been
see
solved. Like, I don't need to address that. Yes, losing slins is less bad than slavery, and if you want to take that up, I'd say bring it up with the philosophers. That problem is solved. It's like saying, is one lower
Well,
than 5? Yes.
Well, I mean, I know certain philosophers who would be able to give me a proper answer on this, because they would say, well, we'd have these things called property rights, and you're not allowed to ever infringe on property rights. But if your system of right and wrong is not based on property, as instead based on what things people don't want to happen, and the only way we can figure out which ones are worse and which ones are better is by having one society try out one system and another society try out another system, and seeing which one does better, then we would need this no breaking friendship society.
Well, no, again, like, that problem's already been solved. I just don't need to address it for any of my points. Like, we know slavery worse than losing friendship. Why doesn't make a difference to the argument here. It's just irrelevant. I don't need to give any philosophical justification. We know one thing is worse than another thing, and so a society with less of the bad thing is a better society. And so all I need to show is that, does this policy minimize the bad thing? That's all I need to do to show that UBI is good. If you want some kind of complicated justification for which ones are the good and bad things, well, I'll just point you to the other philosophers who deal with that. It's just irrelevant to my argument.
Right, but I don't think they have actually dealt with it, certainly not in the way that you're asserting. But anyway, how did you determine that taxation means fewer infringements on freedom as opposed to no taxation?
Because taxation leads to less death, less crime, less starvation, more healthcare, more social benefits, more education. Pretty much all of the good things come from government.
So why is it that taxation leads to less death?
Healthcare.
Okay, so when you have like tax-funded healthcare, that means less death.
Yes.
How'd you come to that conclusion?
By looking at the data of all the governments that impose tax and funded healthcare and rate of death related to that health. What is it? All the different health criterion, long life expectancy, rate of infection at medical facilities, the medical care, quality of medical care, the waiting lists of how long it takes to get medical care, the number of people who can get medical care. All of that statistics lead to the fact that the societies that have the greatest level of medical coverage are those that have government subsidized healthcare systems like the NHS.
Well, let's say we set up Zuluistan and TjumpsChair, right? And TjumpsChair, you decided, well, we're going to have complete public healthcare. We're going to start funding it through taxation and stuff. And then disaster strikes, massive meteor hits TjumpsChair, huge swaths of the population die. Would that be enough for me to conclude that, well, this guy just tried out public healthcare and look how the deaths spiked? Would that be enough for me to conclude that public healthcare bad?
No, right. We agree there's a difference between correlation and causation.
Right. So, but all you're doing when you're saying, well, this country with this its statistics are better and stuff, that all that is looking at correlations. It's not demonstrating a causal link between publicizing healthcare and fewer deaths.
Well, you can never prove causation in science, but if you start dozens of different countries and institute TjumpsChair healthcare and they all get hit by a meteorite, then you can inductively conclude that this system attracts meteorites of some kind. And so by eliminating the randomness factor and trying it multiple times, you can come to a reasonable conclusion that there is a correlation between trying the system and meteorite strikes or something along those lines. And so if we do have that evidence, we are justified in concluding that this system is detrimental to society, which I believe we do have that data in the case of not government-formed healthcare. It's not obviously meteorite strikes, but there is a higher level of death and less coverage and more disease in countries that don't have these things consistently over thousands of experiments rather than just one. And if that happened, even with meteorite strikes, we probably want to stop trying whatever is causing the meteorite strikes, as far as we can tell.
I mean, you've actually missed out another point the empiricists can lay on to keep their conclusions as they want them. You know, I might have the conclusion, well, raising the minimum wage increases the general standard of living. And, you know, I raise the minimum wage and it doesn't increase the general standard of living. Instead, it goes down. I say, well, actually, I need to control for this other variable. I also need to have an import tariff. And then I try that with the import tariff and it's like, oh, no, the general standard of living's went down. Maybe if I wear a funny hat this time, that's another variable I need to control for. You can just keep adding more and more variables that you never come to the end of it. Because as you said yourself, you can't prove causation under your system. But I mean, the rationalists, we can demonstrate causation.
No, but it's if there's no positive correlation, like if it never works, then obviously that's not evidence for the hypothesis. But if you can do some amount that works consistently with a high level of success, that is evidence of causation. So if increasing the minimum wage or whatever does have a correlation to higher living standards in multiple countries, then it's reasonable to include it as a factor in contributing to higher living standards. Since we do see that in many countries, it is rational to include that increasing the minimum wage does increase living standards, since we do have solid evidence for many countries doing that and then having an increase in living standards.
We know, thanks to the Austrian economists, that in fact, objectively, it's the case that it will reduce the general societal welfare, because you're going to have involuntary unemployment when you have a minimum wage.
Yes, but not to the same degree as the quality of standards actually rise for the vast majority of people. So I'm not a fan of minimum wages, so I'm like kind of in agreement with you, but the societies in general are increasing in quality of standards when people do increase minimum wage. And so it's justified for a certain group of people to believe that they are a causal factor in that, even if I disagree.
Right, but they're increasing in spite of the increase in minimum wage, not because of it. And we know this is the case because we have praxeology. We can actually go through and see, right, what are the causal chains?
Right. I mean, again, I agree with you. I'm not a fan of minimum wage here, but
so we could do healthcare then.
Sure.
Right. We know objectively it's the case that if you have a large government bureaucracy controlling something, you will necessarily be inefficient in your allocation of scarce means. This is the economic calculation problem. So you will less efficiently allocate the means in terms of healthcare if you have public healthcare. So you'll have you will have worse healthcare. Or maybe you have too much healthcare, right? Because you can have too much healthcare, just as you can have too much of anything, right? But all we know is you'll be misallocating means. You're going to tend towards misallocation of means because you don't know when you're allocating them correctly.
Well, that isn't technically a problem. Like if I have a field that I'm trying to water and I overwater the field or whatever, it's wasting resources, but more of the field grows. Or if I have a capitalistic system, for example, I would underwater the field and many of the crops would die and I'd produce less growth of the field. So having an oversaturated field of water in that case is actually a benefit, even though, so it's not a, it's not accurate. It's not an accurate usage of the money, but there's no way to perfectly allocate the resources to make all of the crops grow. If you try to perfectly allocate resources, you're going to have a lot of crops die and only maintain the ones that are the most efficient, which creates a less productive society overall. And so having systems that waste resources can still have a greater outcome than one that is more efficiently allocating resources just to a lesser extent.
I mean, if you have you are overwatering your field because, the central planning authority said, right, we need a bunch of water here. The problem is those means the water didn't just come out of nowhere. You're misallocating it away from where it's more useful, where people are willing to pay more for it. And that's, if you have prices on the factors of production, you know exactly where everybody wants everything. That is how you efficiently allocate scarce means, if you have a price mechanism. But if you don't have a price mechanism, you're just guessing. You're saying, right, I reckon 20 more MRI machines would be good. But really, the amount of money spent, the amount of resources which go into those 20 MRI machines would actually be way better on building a well down the road, right? You don't know. You can't know unless you have prices.
I'm not sure what you mean there. So like prices are irrelevant to economic success in this case. So like if we know that there is arable land here and it's pretty common in this location, and so paying for arable land is pretty cheap, but there's a desert over there and they own oil or whatever, and so they want water a lot. They pay a lot more for water because it's a much more processed resource. It's more valuable to not give it to them and to put it in the arable land to grow crops, because those crops can then feed both groups of people. And so even though it's cheaper in this location, it's still better to keep it in this location because the thing that it produces can support both locations, even though you would make more profit for selling it to the oil people. You are
If you
muted.
would make more profit for selling it to the oil people, then what?
I think it was just a delay. Like you were talking. I saw your mouth move, but didn't hear you. So go ahead.
All right. If you have prices and you know for a fact that you would make more money if you sell it to the oil people, that means that it's in more demand over there than over in the arable land place, right?
Yep.
So it should be put over to the oil people. That's where it should be going. It's a misallocation to put it in the wrong place.
That seems just obviously wrong. So the argument here is that if I give the water to the arable land people, they'll be able to make more crops, and the crops will feed both the people in the arable land and the people in the oil. They just won't have the same water, so they won't be able to grow their own crops. But they really want to grow their own crops because they like them, and so they will pay significantly more money, and they're richer because they have oil, so they have significantly more money to be able to pay you for the water. But because they're taking the water, they can grow in their land is far less arable land, and so they can grow less crops. And so for the same amount of water, it takes a significantly more amount of the water to grow the same amount of crops, which means you get a lower crop yield by giving it to this people, even though you make more money. And so from a governmental standpoint, the better option is to give all of it to the arable land, grow all of the crops, and then give the crops to both peoples. And so you sustain both groups of people, which is a larger number of people, because you have more food, even though you're giving it to people who won't pay as much for it. And so that system would be an objectively better system than the one you're proposing, because it is the ability to increase the number of people and their productivity, and by not simply giving to who's going to pay the most.
Right. The problem here is that if you are allocating resources away from where they're most in demand, what you're doing is you're misallocating. These people who are making crops, they're making too much crops, because you can make too much crops, right? We just take the reduction case. All the means in the world are being funneled into making crops. Well, suddenly there are no means left to make cars, transport those crops. There are no means left to make any of the other ends that you might want to achieve, right? Like we have scarce means. This is
Right.
it's a fact of nature that we have a scarce quantity of means. We don't have infinite. We're not in the Garden of Eden here.
Right.
So we need to know the best way to allocate these means. Where should all this water go? Where should all this go? Where should all that go? Right? And the way you figure out that is through prices, because that way you know exactly how much different places are demanding it. You could imagine that you've got this railroad where you're planning to build a railroad, and you could either build it through the mountain or you could go around the mountain. Going around the mountain would cost way more steel, right? Because you need to go all the way around. But going through the mountain, it would take up engineers' time because they got to figure out how to build this tunnel. How do you pick which route to go for? If you're a central planner, you just got to kind of guess, right? But if you're in a capitalist market, you would just go, right, how expensive is engineering and how expensive is steel? And you look at the prices of the different ones and you go, okay, right, it would be cheaper to go through the mountain. That means that engineering is less desired by other people than it would be. Other people are freeing up engineering means for use in your project. So you're specifically going for the different products that you could buy for. The ones which are cheaper, they're less desired by other men. So you should probably go ahead and use more of it.
Well, again, that doesn't make any sense. Like the price controls there just objectively fail, given like the example I just used. Rich place has lots of oil oil sells for a large price. They have lots of money, so they can afford it more. And so the price of water there, and they have less water, and so they're going to pay more for it. So the price of water there is significantly higher, and you could sell it and make more profit by selling water to them, but they can't use it as effectively. Their land is not as effective a means of investing the water in to produce crops. And so if there's a limited number of space, limited number of arable land, and a limited number of crops you can produce, and you want the most successful society, you would want to produce the most crops to support the most people. And giving it to the desert land would not do that. It would objectively fail at that, even though you maximize profit. And so if we were comparing two societies that had the same general problems, and one says we're going to give money to the arable land to produce food to generate a larger population, and one says we're going to give it to the desert land to make the most profit, the society who gives it to the arable land is going to win. They are going to live longer. They're going to have more profit. They're going to have higher health standards. They're going to have more education. They're going to have better everything. And so comparing these two societies, the one that gives it to the people who can use it the best, even if it's not at the best price, is the one who's going to win and be an objectively better society.
I'm not sure if you've been around many rich people, but they generally don't just decide, I'm just going to buy up all the water in the world because I feel like it, even though I can't grow any crops here and all the water is going to go to waste. Because people who are doing that, they're generally going to lose their money pretty fast. You have like a sort of natural selection. People who are wealthier, they generally know how to be spending their money, right? They're not just willy-nilly choosing, I want a bunch of water and I want a bunch of this and I want a bunch of that.
Wait, that's
right?
exactly what they're doing.
Do that. If you
do
that,
that's what a golf course is. That's literally what a golf course is.
Right, because they make money out of it. If they didn't make money out of it, they'd no longer be an entrepreneur, right? They'd lose their money.
But they make money out of it by playing golf instead of producing food. And so the argument here is that if we produce food instead of golf, the food will then build up the population. The population will grow, causing the entire economy to grow more than the golf. And so in this example, if we compare two societies, one that allows golf courses, one that only allows corn fields.
Well, no, not only allow golf courses.
It's just like,
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I have the correct amount of golf courses and have the correct amount of corn.
Well, the argument here is that if we have a society, if you have an option of giving the arable land to either golf courses or corn, we give them all to corn, just nothing but corn, the population growth in there will be significantly higher because that society will be able to allow for a much larger population. And so that society will do better than one that we allow.
Actually, what you probably have is a bunch of wasted corn, right?
Sure, we will have
aren't willing to buy
corn.
that much corn. You'd have a bunch of wasted corn. You'd have rotting corn, and you'd have bread lines and rotting bread going around, right? That's what you'd have. The Soviet Union tried this. They failed.
But you'd also have more population and more people not starving to death. And so in that society,
because if you're centrally planning, you don't know how to allocate these resources. You're making too much corn, too little of this other thing, too much of this, too little of that. You're not able to transport it properly. You've got all these problems because you don't know what people want and where they want it.
Well, no, you do know what people need. So we know, like, if we look at America's demographics, we can say these people are starving. They don't have enough food. If we generate more food, we can just send it to them and they won't be starving. Their society will grow. This increases the economic productivity of that group. They can reproduce more, have more kids. Or we can use this area to build a golf course, which makes rich people happy. In this case, the economically correct decision is to say no to the golf course, yes to build more farm to supply these people. So we can measure the amount of resources that are needed to support the number of people we have and to not make them starve. We can measure the amount of starving people, and we can say we need this much more arable land to cover those people to make them more productive members of society. And so this arable land, even though we'd make more profit by offering it to rich people for golf courses, would be economically a bad decision because we can grow the society more by making it arable land for these starving people.
Well, let's imagine a hypothetical central planner. They say, well, we've got reports from this village over here that they're starving to death. They need more corn quickly. And it's like, okay, all right. Let's have a bunch of corn over here. And, we've got a bunch of corn over here. Let's take all this corn and shove it over here. And then the next week it's like, hey, these guys you took all the corn from, they're starving now. It's like, oh shit. Well, let's take a bunch of corn from over here. And, the central planner, they don't know the impacts of their allocation. They can't know the impact because they don't have factor prices.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. So if we have a plot of land not being used, could go golf course, could go corn. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing your problem here because like they make it into a cornfield, which has the same effect as all the other cornfields and all the other locations. And so we know what the effect's going to be because we can say, oh, here's what happens in when we create a cornfield in this location, and we're just going to do the same thing over here. So we know what's going to happen.
They don't know what the effects. They don't know what the earlier effects of their corn production was. They don't know anything because they don't have factor prices.
We don't care about the prices. We care about the scientific impact on the land. Like we can know what happens when you create a cornfield. We know what happens to the water levels. We know what happens to the nitrogen levels in the plants.
But this is irrelevant for people.
Well, I don't care about the people. People are dumb. People are stupid morons. I want to know survivability. I want to grow the number of people. I want to have them survive. I don't care about their money. Their money is irrelevant. I care about the actual data.
If you want to grow the number of people, then you should probably be able to allocate means effectively, right? If you don't know where to allocate means, you're going to have pretty bad population. I mean, look at the death rates in the Soviet Union. If you like data so much, right?
Right. I'm very familiar with those. I don't see how that relates to what I said there. So I agree we need a way to correctly allocate data, but we're doing that with not money because money doesn't do that. Money fails at that. What does do that really well is needs of life and survivability. How do you need food? That's a good one. The impact on the environment. That's a good one. The health impacts on people. That's a good one. Like these are very good ways to know how to allocate resources. Money is a very bad way. It doesn't successfully allocate resources. That's why systems with governments who allocate resources not based on money, but based on who needs food or who has lead poisoning or who needs healthcare, who needs education. Those work far, far better than any monetary based system where we're trying to assess where we should allocate resources.
No, they don't know who wants food, who wants healthcare. They don't know this because they don't have price signals. So they don't know demand.
No, they know better than your price signals.
How do they know better? How do they figure it out?
Because there's people there and they need food to survive. So they need food.
How did they figure that out? How did they figure out which people need what food? How did they figure that out?
By measuring their health standards, taking blood samples, saying they're nutrient deficient, they don't have food, they're starving.
So for just food, we need to have this massive apparatus where we're going around measuring everybody's blood levels and everything, running them through some system to determine what food they need, right?
Sure.
And you have to do this every single week or something, right? This is a huge apparatus. And then how do you figure out how much vials do we need for all this blood testing, right? How much vials do we need? How do we get the glass for those blood vials, right? So we need to have glass mining. How much glass? What machine should we use to mine the glass, right?
Yeah.
You're going over all this. How on earth is a central planner even supposed to do one of these blood tests? They don't know what machines to use for mining the glass. They don't know what type of glass to use. They don't know what sort of testing should be done, right?
I'm lost. We know all of those things. Like we do this all the time.
No, we don't. We know it if we have a market, right?
No, we do these completely independent of any market. Like healthcare systems do these without any considerations of any markets.
So does the central planner, does he build a road to transport these blood tests, or does he build a railroad? Which one does he build?
Either one. I don't care.
Okay, but one is going to be better than the other.
Sure.
All right. So how does he determine which one's better?
It wouldn't make a difference if either one. If the profit,
it definitely could make a difference.
No,
right? Because maybe the road would take 7 weeks to get these blood tests back, and by that point, everyone's dead, and the railroad would be much quicker. Right? He couldn't figure out which one would be better. But maybe you should go for the slower one because it's cheaper to build, right? The central planner can't know any of this.
It's irrelevant because if you're saving more lives than the cost of either one,
very irrelevant.
Not really, no.
But you're not saving more lives because even to do the first step of giving them food, you don't know how to construct this entire apparatus. The economy is a very, very complex thing.
Not really.
Like it's
like we do like all of those things you're saying we don't know. We do. We know all of those things. Like we have data and proof on all of those things. We know when we can build economies by increasing food supplies to people. We know those work. We have absolute proof those work in society. Like there's no ambiguity there. All the governments agree. Yes, more food to starving people helps grow economy. This is good. More education, good. Like we have proof on all of those things. This is not like a hard problem to solve. This is something we've solved hundreds of years ago. This is a solved problem you're bringing up and saying we don't have a solution.
So let's just maximize education. We're just going to throw everything towards education. Suddenly, there's nothing left for food. Okay, so we got to take some from education and put it into food. But how much do we take from education and put into food? How much? Right? This is unanswerable.
Or we've literally answered that. That's been answered. Like that's
Okay,
again,
well, can
you're
you give
bringing
me
up
the
problems
answer?
that we've solved
Can you
hundreds
give
of
me
years
the
ago.
answer?
Yes, the things we
Like,
do in governments right now, like how much do we put into food versus how much we put in education, is contingent on what produces enough food to sustain the people. That's what we do. Like this
right,
is
but
something that governments
I want to
literally
know their
do.
exact solution, so I know they're not just making an arbitrary choice, right? What is the exact steps they took to come to figure out how much education we need and how much food we need? How did they
That's
figure that out?
dependent on each government and their process, but like we already like I don't need
So
to
there are
know
different
that.
processes which you could choose
Sure.
between.
Yes, but we know they
Which
work.
one's your favorite?
I don't know which one. I have no idea which one my favorite is, but we know they work. Like, so I could just say,
But
here's
you're
an
claiming this
example,
is you claiming it works, right?
right?
If you're
Because
claiming something works, then you should be able to demonstrate it for me.
we have 7 billion people on the planet right now. That's good.
How do you know we wouldn't have 17 trillion? Right? You
Because
don't know
under your
this.
system, people die more. So we can compare under this
Prove
system.
it.
We have. That's what governments have been doing for hundreds of years. Like that was my
Oh,
original
governments have
argument.
proved it. Can you give me any of these proofs? You keep saying, oh, it's
Yes.
been proven, but you haven't given me any of these proofs.
No, I have. Like that was one of the first thing I listed was that if we compare governments that instantiate government-assisted healthcare, the health benefits of those countries increase. Longevity of life, life expectancy, decrease the rates of infections at hospitals, increase people who get healthcare. Like all of those things increase. Like we know this. We have hundreds and hundreds of different independent studies of different countries that all measure and know this works. Like I'm not sure what you're even asking now. Like that we know this works. This is why they do it.
But like, right, so there's been some country, right, where they've implemented healthcare
Yeah.
and then it's caused more health, right? Or there's been some
Yes.
country where they've, started nationalizing all the bread production and it's made people have more bread, right?
I don't know about the bread.
But I mean, if this is just a general rule that when the government can plan better than an economy, surely it would be the case that if you nationalize bread, people would be better fed.
I have no idea. I know for a fact that we've already proven the case in healthcare and it works. So that one's already done. I don't know about bread, but I know in the case of healthcare, we know for a fact it works. This has been in the past. It's already been done. We already have the data to show it works. So in the case of healthcare, this is good. I don't think it would necessarily apply to all cases that this would work.
So you think it's possible that prices could better allocate in some places but not others?
Sure, absolutely.
What would be the principal difference between these places? Like, is there a place where you know that the government doesn't allocate as well as markets?
Things people want versus things people don't want.
So, what?
So like people don't want to give mail to rural areas. Like Amazon does not supply shipping to rural areas in America. UPS does, or USPS does. So in the case where something isn't profitable but still benefits people, government does it better. In the case where something's profitable, then private industry does it better, typically.
Okay, so if you can make a profit off it, then private industry does it better.
If you can make a profit off it and it's something people want voluntarily and don't need necessarily.
Okay, well, I mean, I think people would want voluntarily to have healthcare, and I think I could make a neat profit off giving people healthcare. So
No,
markets
that's
do
something
better.
they need. So, like, if I'm dying of cancer, I don't want healthcare. I need healthcare. So, this is like if you need it and it's not something you consent to needing, then it's better done by the government. Like okay, we got 1 minute left. That's all right. Do like closing statements really quick. I'd say that in the case of something that's required to make society better but isn't profitable, government's going to do it better. In the case where it's profitable and people want it, like cookies, then private industry does it better. But requirements that people don't want to do, like healthcare, roads, USPS, government does it better.
What if I would die tomorrow if I didn't have a cookie right now? How would a central planner ever work that out? Because they've already gone, oh, well, people only want cookies. They don't need them to survive, right? So they've already relegated that to free market, and suddenly I'm here dying, right? Or could I just go down to the shops and buy a cookie for quite cheap, right?
Sure, if some magical day, like people started to can't live without cookies.
Yeah, so why couldn't I just do the same for my cancer scans, right? Just go down to the shops and buy it real cheap.
I'm not sure what you mean. Like cancer scans, like in most countries that have national healthcare, you can buy it really cheap. In America, it's the one that you can't.
Oh, I'm the winner.
Yeah, you got 1 point. All right. Well, that's
So,
it for the debate, though. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Yep.